Hi there, I'm your host Clive Sirkin, and welcome to the Unstuck podcast, where we're on a journey to help you get control of your work environment, get yourself unstuck, and perform to your full potential. My guest today is Christy Hiler. Christy's the CEO and owner of Cornett, which is an ad agency, or I think an ideas agency based in Lexington, Kentucky. Christy's commercial remit is to drive what I'd say advantage outcomes for her clients, and there's no doubt she's doing it. And when you finish listening to this podcast, go and check out their work. It's pretty cool. The story here for me is, Christy worked at Cornett for a long time, and you'll hear the story. But in 2020, she bought the company and worked through the process of certifying it as a woman-owned business. And she realized in that process, or came to the conclusion that how grossly underrepresented women-owned agencies are within the industry. And so in addition to building her business, she set herself as a remit to elevate and change the way women get to own agencies and the whole game of women ownership. And she's now highly, and I'd say laser focused on moving beyond what was historically a laudable and to a degree sadly deficient goal of elevating women in leadership roles to moving well beyond that. And she set herself the goal of ownership as the end game, not just leadership representation. Christy, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Clive.
It's awesome to see you two times in 1 week. This is unprecedented. So, hey, listen, before we get started, I'm going to do the disclaimer, right, which is I'm going to ask some pretty naive questions and you're going to straighten me out. And in part because there is a level of naivete, and in part because I think I should act a bit as a foil, because one of the things when I talk to people, especially men, it's like sometimes they don't know the questions to ask or they feel stupid asking the questions, and then that sort of prevents the conversation. So you can either put it on the heading of I'm naive or uneducated or have an unconscious bias, or I'm acting as a foil. You decide. But I thought I'd just throw in that disclaimer ahead of the time.
Okay, but let me just say, I've already decided, Clive, you are not naive. You're not. And in fact, I would say one of the things that I am most impressed by you is not your experience, although you are unbelievably experienced and connected in this business. What has impressed me the most and drawn me into more and more of these conversations with you is that that you really believe in women. You believe in me. You believe in what I'm trying to do, what we are trying to do, and you listen. Yes, I think some of it is about asking the questions, but I think a bigger piece is also just listening and like really hearing that, and then being willing to advance that conversation.
I appreciate that. I mean, for me, I don't know any better. Like, I've had I've grown up in a house of women, 3 older sisters, and I'm married to an incredible professional. And throughout my career, I've been shaped by incredible, smart people, both men and women, but a ton of women. And so it's like I don't know any other better. So it's sort of, to be honest, it's frustrating to me when I have some of these conversations. I go, like, we're in 2023, people. Mm-hmm. It's a little absurd, but let's talk about it. I mean, you typically hear talk when you talk about women in business, you'll hear conversations about representation at executive and leadership roles. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about the percentage and the goals of percentage, it's sort of bizarre. And you're a data person, I'm sure you'll give us the numbers, but it's like I hear the numbers and I can hear the goals of we'd like to get to this number of. That's crazy. But you're talking a whole different level. You're talking about ownership. And I'm curious as to why I don't know, maybe it's not moved beyond, but certainly why you've elevated to leadership. And in a way, obviously, the two are connected. But talk to me about how your thinking flows.
Yeah, they are connected. I know that the ownership conversation, and I know that the ownership percentage can move. I know we can see progress because we've seen progress. We've seen progress in the leadership space. There's a lot of conversation, and has been for years, about putting more women into the position of leadership. And because of those conversations, there are more women in the position of leadership. Unfortunately, the number in ownership is unbelievably low, and especially in advertising. So generally in the US, 40% of businesses are owned by women. But in the advertising industry, less than 1% of agencies. There's 20,000 agencies in the US, and 4A's gave me what they admitted is not the most complete, but it was the best that I could find, and I asked everybody. And it had less than 200 agencies on it. And so in the beginning, Clive, I thought, well, maybe it's just that nobody is tracking this. And at the time, so I've been here at Cornett for 20 years. And 5 years ago, I took over as president. And in December of 2020, I bought 100% of the agency shortly after I started going through that process of getting certified, as you mentioned. And that's when I started asking, okay, well, how many other female agency owners? And nobody could tell me. And that doesn't really work well with me. So I just kept asking and demanding, somebody has to tell me. And when I got that number, I was so disappointed. But again, I thought maybe it's just that it's not being tracked. And what if we make it easy for women agency owners, female agency owners, to just raise their hand and say, I'm a female agency owner. You don't have to go through the process of getting certified, because it is very cumbersome. You have to supply an crazy amount of information, and there's also a cost associated with it. So I thought maybe that was preventing us from having a real number. But I would say, so before I get into where we are now, we've got a great web team here. So I said, can you build me a site that'll make it easy for women to just say, here's my name and a little bit of information, the agency, and then immediately we'll just publish their name and agency to the list of female-owned agencies. And right now we have about 270. So not that many more than I thought. And I will say it's not complete, but I do think it's a good representation.
Right.
Most of the agencies that, especially bigger agencies, they're all on there. There are some for sure that keep popping up that we keep adding. And I hope that it is an ever-growing list, but I feel like less than 1% is still where we are. And that compared to 40%, of businesses in general being, we can only go up.
Right. Well, and even if there's a massive margin there in the NA numbers, or the 4A's, I think it was 4A's numbers, It's still absurd. But you said we. So talk about we. What is we? Because you founded something, an organization, a group, a coalition.
Yeah. So the initiative is called OWNIT. And really the point is to track and also work to increase the number of female-owned agencies in this business. And along the way, so as the site was about ready to launch, I started sharing it with some other female agency owners and asking them, hey, what do you think about this? And every one of them it was almost like I had just, breathed life, or unlocked something that they didn't even know that they needed, and every one of them was like, what can I do? How can I be a part of this? What can I do to help? And so I started talking to them and getting to know them, and I loved it. I loved hearing their stories. And so then the other piece that kind of, came about from those conversations was a podcast. So now, I thought, if I really enjoy hearing the stories of how these other female agency owners came into this position, I bet other people would enjoy hearing these stories. So I started a podcast, and really I just capture each female agency owner's journey to ownership. And we talk a lot about what is holding women back. What are the challenges that we've got to overcome? And how can this community, how can we, what's our role? Where should we play? Where can we have the most impact to see these numbers go up? And what is it going to be like? What is this industry going to be like when it does change? Because it's going to.
Got it. And I mean, this is one of the foil questions, but it's like, and at the other night when we were at dinner, I had a conversation with one of the people sitting around the table, and she said something that I'm aware of, but it's like, it's sort of, every time you hear it, it sort of hits hard. It's kind of like, and I mean, you've created a coalition of women-owned agencies helping each other, and these are competitors, right? So you're helping competitors. You're supposed to compete with competitors. And the person I was talking to, she made a comment about, we've been trained as women to sort of see each other as the enemy. So do you think, how prevalent is that now? Because you're obviously doing the 180-degree opposite of that. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of a rising tide, sort of lift all boats mentality, I would assume.
Yes. Yeah. I want us all to win. I want every one of these agencies to win. And here's the thing, 99% of the business is not with us. I mean, probably even more, really. We're just talking about numbers, right? If less than 1% of agencies are owned by women, I think if there was a way, and it's really hard because so many of these agencies are privately held, to get like their revenue numbers. But I think if we were able to get our hands on the split of revenue in this business between female-owned agencies, let me just share the largest female-owned agency is less than 200 people. Okay, most of them are pretty far south of that. So you can imagine the disparity that we would probably see if we could get our hands on the actual share of this market.
But it wouldn't shock me, sad as it is, but it's like you talk about two separate but connected things. One is, how do I become a woman-owned certified agency, right? Which is like a massive amount of bureaucracy and bullshit to get it. And there's an importance of that because it helps in the procurement pitch process. But there's a more fundamental issue, which is the barriers that prevent and discourage women ownership. And that's more of the root cause. And why do you think, what are those, and why do you think they're so powerful?
Okay, so there's a number of barriers, and we bucket them. We've looked at them, and so we've done, in these 45 interviews with other female agency owners, but then we've also done some quantitative research as well. So here are, I would say, kind of like the three buckets. And we bucket them by, I would say, long and slow progress. Like, what are the things that are just like we got to eat away at, but it's going to take some time, right? And some of those barriers are lack of confidence. And I can tell you that is prevailing. One of the biggest barriers is that women don't believe that they can do it. Which is, there is zero evidence. There is no reason for that. But that is, but I got to tell you, Clive, that was me. That was my experience. And let me tell you a little bit about that. So what that looked like for me when I was first approached with the opportunity, hey, Christy, would you take over this agency when I'm ready to exit? At first I was like, no. And for many years I was like, no, because not that long ago, when I looked around and I saw women in positions of leadership, honestly, they looked a lot like men. And that didn't feel like, I didn't see a model that felt true to me. And so I want to talk about those models in a minute and why that podcast is so important. Because I really do believe it is easier to be her if you can see her. So that held me back for a while because I am many things. I love this business. Clive, I've talked to you about it so much. I love this business. But this is not the only thing. I also am a mom. I am a wife. I am many things. So
And I don't want to take, because you're going through the barriers, but I want to come back to it at some point now later.
yes.
Where you said they don't have the confidence. There's two parts of it. I don't have the confidence, as in I don't think I could do it, or I don't have the confidence because in order to do it, I have to be something other than what I want to be.
Okay, yeah.
False choice.
But those are the two things I had to prove. Okay, I needed to know that I could do it differently and be successful. Okay, so I had confidence that I could do it differently, but I did not know, because there wasn't the evidence that showed me that I could do it differently and be successful. Okay,
Right.
so the reason it took me so long to say yes to this position is because I had to prove it. But I am really lucky that I was given that opportunity. You talked early on about, Christy, navigating these old, well-entrenched systems. Okay, here's the thing that I want to be really open about. I always had somebody. My career was in the hands of somebody who really believed in me. And I'm very fortunate for that. I have been surrounded by a lot of people in my career that have really believed in me and have given me the ability to prove that out. And I did say, if I could do it differently and be successful, but let's start going down that path and see. And so, which is different. My journey is different from everybody else, and everybody's journey is going to be different. But I purchased an agency. I didn't start an agency. So, and those are different, some people, but that's why we need this community like OWNIT. So if you're in a position at an agency right now and you have that opportunity, let's talk. If you don't, if you're interested, but you don't think you have the opportunity where you are, or you don't think that you can be a mom and own an agency and you want to go out on your own, and there are people who have done it. That is why I say it is easier to be her if you can see her. And there are lots of people who have proven that now.
And there's also an element, because last week I had Katie Moran on, who's someone I had the joy of working with. And I remember the very first time we were in a meeting, she was at the agency. And every time she talked, she said something brilliant, really made me thought. And it was like, this is an incredible talent. And then she joined and she went through this process. But part of the story is she had 3 kids, right? And her latest one, who is, I keep forgetting how old he is, but he's about 18 months now. And so each time she had a kid, she learned lessons in terms of, so now the third kid, she's mastered the trade-offs and how to think about trade-offs. And that's what we kind of talked about. And part of OWNIT, I would imagine, is women helping other women to avoid running into the same ditch they ran into and learning through, because an education ain't cheap, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of part of the deal is going I did this and it didn't work, so I did this, and therefore you can avoid that pain point.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed that conversation that you had with her. I loved hearing her experience. It's I've got 4 kids, but I've been where she's been. I know what it's like when you, especially at that, I never actually had 2 kids. I had, our first she's now 15, but then I had boy-girl twins. So I went from 1 to 3. And I felt really still great about 3. Oh man, this is I could do this. And then for me, it was number 4. My number 4 came and just wrecked the ship. But, but yeah. And I really hear what she was saying when she was I kind of gave up on balance. But here's the way I think about balance. I think that there's a lot of conversation, and everybody's different, and balance for everybody is going to be different, and it needs to be, right? Your family is different. The needs of your family are different, the needs of your business. But the way that I think about balance, I don't have this vision of being perfectly perched. I think that it stop with that. I don't know that I've ever felt that, but
there doesn't work.
Right. But I do, for me, balance is sometimes I'm on that fence, right? Instead of being perfectly perched, sometimes I am really really all in on one side, and then I'm going to take a break and I'm going to be really all in on the other. But it is discerning which one to be on, right? Like, where do you really need to be? You've got to get really good at making decisions and feeling confident in those decisions.
And so you were talking, it's like the barriers in the journey. It's you've had your journey. What were the ones that like stunned you?
Well, okay,
And both positive and negative. Like positive one is you've had the benefit, like a lot of us, certainly I have, people around you believed in you and sort of helped you over lack of self. I can't do it. I don't think I'm interested in the ones that if you're like, oh, holy, I didn't see that one.
Yeah, well, let me back up just a minute and finish what those barriers are. So I talked about the lack of confidence, and that's a big one. And I think in that same like long, slow progress is cultural frameworks. And a lot of that is like what you and Katie talked about. Like, you got to kind of like retrain our thinking and reshape some of these conversations, like stop talking about things the way that we've been talking about them, and thinking about them that way. Gender roles and how like time and balance, like I think some of those, but again, like that's going to be long and slow progress. But then the other is lack of role models, which I spoke to. And those are kind of connected, but I do think lack of role models and support, like this community piece, that we can really make an impact. It needs to happen. That's ongoing work. But the third way that we're bucketing it is like these challenges that we have potential to create a big sign and move the needle on. Okay. I initially went into this, Clive, thinking maybe it's a lack of funding. Like maybe it's something that you can that pretty easily you could fit, like not, I don't know that is pretty easily, but more tangibly fix, right? I mean, and I would say that is still most certainly an issue. I mean, I think the latest numbers, and even Aaron the other night was sharing, less than 2%, of VC funding is going to female ventures. But I think that hasn't proven to be the biggest barrier yet. And as I mentioned to you, in my journey, that wasn't a huge barrier for me either. SBA there were a lot of options as I really stepped into that process. But a bigger one, I would say, is business opportunity. Okay, so I think going back to the conversation about the size of the female-owned agencies that exist right now, there are women that I have talked to that were part of big holding agencies and managed hundreds of people, billions in billings, clearly capable. But when they tried to go out on their own and replicate it, they couldn't. And I think we have to increase the influence and the share. We have to I want to see more female-owned agency, but I also want to see them growing and flourishing and being tremendously successful. That's why I say I want to see everybody win, because that is what is going to attract more women into this position. You got to be able to sustain it.
But what's preventing them from sustaining it? I mean,
well, I think a bit like what I'm saying, some of that is business opportunity, having access to some of those, to some of those opportunities. And I think some of it, there's a conversation that I really want to dig into and figure out how can we penetrate that? Is there a commitment from the brand side? Here's like this. Thank you, Clive. Yes. But that is how movement really happens. Okay. Like if we're just over here, all of us in this community, female agency owners talking to ourselves, it's not going to, like, we can make some progress, but not like real change is going to happen when every part of this business is bought into this and taking the action steps necessary. So, that's brands. Brands have a role in this. That's other industry leaders. it's men, it's everybody.
But that's I'm only recording sound. I'm not doing the video. And it's like when you say that, I put my hand up. That's what Chrissy responded to. But it's like one of my massive pet peeves is sort of platitudes and posturing and sort of posters. And my first experience of this was my first large corporate role, and the company was genuinely committed in intent to diversity and inclusion, and yet every year the needle didn't get moved, and whichever sort of number you want to look at. It was like, and it was just at the first sort of second meeting we had on this, and we were looking at scorecards, and I was like, it just dawned on me, it's like all we're just focusing on is numbers. Like, did we get more diverse, however you want to define it? And we were not talking about, and so it was like posters and speeches and bullshit that said that. But we go, well, why aren't we hitting those numbers? It was well, because we're not talking about root cause. And then there's two words: diversity and inclusion. Diversity is an outcome. It's a consequential outcome. Inclusion is a means to that. And I think obviously the same holds true here. Is like people say things, and I've had like bizarre experiences like recruiting, where you go, I will not post a role, an interview for a role, if we don't have at least 50%, right? We're picking up. And so then you get resumes that come in, you look at this resume and you go like, this person's not qualified. And they're going to go, oh, well, we had to include some, let's just pick, in this case, women. And were you shitting me? Like, this is the answer. So I think there needs to be, if companies are serious about it, and that goes back to your point, brands and pitch consultants, then it shouldn't be a numbers game. It should be a legitimate inclusion game. Like, we're going to put women-owned agencies that are outstanding at the table, are capable of winning this business if you're willing to let them win. In other words, if it's a level playing field. So how much do you see where it's about a numbers game versus a legitimate, I'm committed to doing this, in an inclusion game?
Yeah, I think I am 100% aligned with the way that you think about diversity and inclusion. That diversity is the outcome, inclusion is how you get there. So two things I think are going to be really critical. Yes, we have to be included in those searches. But the problem is right now it is a numbers problem. Like, and this is a conversation on the other side of the table the other night that I was having. What is going to be, I think, difficult is there's only right now, right? Like, go to the list. There's 270. I mean, like, that's pretty limiting. Okay, why is that? Do I think that some of those holding companies, or do I think that more women, if they knew that the opportunity was there, would they go out on? Yes, I do. I know that, like, if there is opportunity, right, it's just kind of supply and demand. So we have to be included in those searches, in those opportunities, and there is zero reason not to. There is an unbelievable amount of data to show that we are successful in this position. As I said, I wasn't going to step into this without knowing that I could do it differently and be successful.
Can be, of course. Well, your work, Cornett's work, speaks for itself.
Exactly.
This is not a hypothetical construct. Right?
It's not. It is proven. So it's not like a big ad. It's not like, do something that is going to be hard for this is good for your business. It is good business, and we're running good businesses. So, but I think it also, ownership has to be included in this conversation. Just going back to the beginning of what we were talking about, if we can, I don't know that it is going to be any more difficult than just switching the end goal to not being leadership to being ownership. Ownership has to be included as how many people have you had underneath you, that have talked about their career with you? How much is ownership a part of that conversation? And let me just say, ownership isn't for everybody. But I do think it can and should be a part of conversations. And especially that is the ultimate end goal. That if you like you don't really have the power. And I know this because I was in the position of president before I was in this position of ownership. I was making decisions, but I didn't have the full weight of those decisions. And I mean that from both the rewards and the liability.
Yeah. But just one caveat to that, and I think you mean this, is I always wanted to talk to the people that I had on my team about their aspirations and, you know, where they wanted to get to. And I never wanted a position like success for you is moving vertically if that's not what you define as success. Like you shouldn't feel that being the CEO is the answer. And conversely, to our discussion, ownership is the only answer. However, if you have a desire for it, you shouldn't feel like you can't have it.
Yes. And also,
I think that's what you say, right? It's like when you said it's the ultimate goal, the point is if you should feel like if that's what you wanted, there's no reason why you shouldn't have it.
okay. But let me also shift the way that you're thinking about that a little bit, because it can also be a solution, not necessarily even okay, right? Like it is actually a creative solution to something else that you may want. So for example, it is a very prevalent conversation to say, I don't know if I should stay in this business of advertising because I also I want to be a mom and I feel like I have to choose. Okay, do you know ownership is actually a fantastic option for you if you are feeling like you cannot do that where you currently are.
Right.
Okay. I mean, I have had enough of these conversations now to know that is how you set the table that you want. Ownership lets you set the table that you want.
Love that.
Okay. So yeah, and it can be as small as you want or as big. That table, you are in ultimately the position of power to determine what that looks like for you and also what that could look like for so many other people, so many other women and men who want it better.
Tasha, I'd never thought of it that way, and it's so obvious, right? It's been hiding in plain sight that creating your own organization and having the culture and the environment that you would want that you don't have, ownership is the way to get it. Thank you, because I didn't have that on the radar, and it's so obvious. We're getting up for time. The one thing that strikes me from the first time we met at the coffee shop and throughout all of our conversations in this short time we've known each other is you have such an incredible passion for this, and it's sort of like an endless capacity. But your passion hasn't translated into, you're not down on the world, right? And it's easy to get down on the world when you keep bashing your head against the world. So I'm just curious, like, what keeps you so optimistic? Because people, it's hard to tell. And by the way, I'm going to start filming. I got to get my shit together, because when people see you and your animation and your just all of the body language, there's a level of energy and positivity that comes through you as you engage. What could easily be a frustrating negative spiral that says, I'm bashing my head against a wall. What keeps you? I guess it's just your wiring, right? Like that's
I think so.
You have a DNA deficiency.
Well, I don't know that I would call it a deficiency, but I definitely am. I am an optimistic. I'm like an eternal optimist. But here's the thing, and I think that a lot of that is because I believe, like you, Clive, I believe in people. I do. And I don't spend a lot of time, and I'm not fueled by what has been, but I am fueled by what is possible. And I know with certainty that this is possible and it is good. And so a lot of people talk about not being able to have hard conversations or, not wanting to tackle, hard issues. But I don't think that hard conversations have to be painful, right? I mean, I think that if your intentions are good and you are focused on truth, and also like I've had enough of this conversation to know that I'm not alone in this. I don't feel alone in this at all. I feel really supported. And I know that it's not just me that wants this. There are many people, and not just women, who want to see us make this progress in this industry. It is beyond time, right? I mean, I want to say that I have always felt really supported. And I have had a lot of support and people who believed in me, but I have heard enough stories that are very real of women who do not have that, have not had that, and have had very bad experiences
Right.
in
Well,
this. That is equally real.
no. I mean, it goes back to my very first podcast, which I very purposely had Pete Dalkamara on, who's sort of been like one of the, like intellectual oxygen for me. And he had this thought, which was performance equals potential plus encouragement minus obstacles. So this is really simple formula, and companies and organizations think of outcomes, performance, and they don't spend anywhere enough time starting with the presumption that you have infinite potential. And if I can give you the right encouragement, I'm not talking cheerleading, although that's part of it, but real tangible encouragement, and do whatever I can to remove the obstacles, you can live to that potential. And that's at the heart of what you're saying, right? And go ahead.
And that's what I mean also by those hard conversations. Like, those are gifts.
Right.
Like some of those hard conversations, like it is a gift to give somebody information because they cannot fix what they do not know is a problem.
Right. And that's why I say encouragement is not just cheerleading.
Right.
It's but listen, and again, to your earlier point, this is not a woman thing. It's like a business person thing. If you're a business person and you want commercial outcomes, you're going to want to be sort of super supportive of this in your journey. If people are going to be listening, and I'm going to get emails because I get a lot of them after each episode, how do people find you and get involved in OWNIT?
Yes, thanks. Go to untilyouownit.com.
Untilyouownit.com.
Yes, and you can also find me on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I am Christy Hiler, and I would love to connect. I'd love to have any, like whatever you're feeling, whatever ideas, they're going to be heard. And I welcome them. We are having our first virtual event on March 15th in partnership with Adweek. And it is going to be just a 2-hour, a mix of like, we have spent some time really narrowing in on our vision and our mission. And then also like those territories that we can really make some impact. Where do we need to focus? We've got a few brand folks who are going to speak to why it is important, why this is good, not just because it's the right thing to do, but it is good for their business. So they're going to speak to that. And then we're going to have some different speakers talk about different stages of agencies and wherever you are, if you're starting, if you're growing, scaling, or you're ready to sell. Those we'll have some folks that are talking about different stages of ownership, and then some opportunity for network. But it is open to not just women who own agencies currently or want to own agencies, but also anybody who really believes in what we're doing.
Which I do. And by the way, listen, I would just encourage you to get a hold of Christy and join this program, because I can tell you from first-hand benefit, and I can't remember, we met earlier this year, so we've known each other just for a short time. I'm better for it, and I love spending time with you because it's oxygen. So we're past time, in the sense of I normally go shorter, but there's no way of stopping this. So thank you so much for giving me the time twice in 2 weeks, 1 week. It's always fun talking to you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for believing in what we're doing.
I do. Amen.
This podcast was brought to you by Screen Dragon. We break down barriers, make work flow, and unlock talent. Visit ScreenDragon.com to see our software in action.